This is not a show and might not even be a connection. Here's Judah and Guest.
It's Judah and Guest, and today I am pleased to have Jared with us today. Now, some of you, I don't know. So Jared used to come on with me a bunch on the. Remember when we used to do like almost every other morning for. We'd look at news and stuff for reverse redaction.
Right.
But is this the first time you've been on Not a Show?
I think so. Yeah.
Well, this is not even a show.
That might be really appropriate today because considering how loosely we're playing this.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to get you on. I know you're somebody who is an informed consumer. I've been impressed with how much you've looked into things before, and I recently have been looking to maybe exit the Canon world and enter Sony. So a little bit of background. Both of us pretty influenced, I'd say, as far as cameras go, by Ford, right? Ford Sue's surfing violinist, or
not for me.
No?
I don't know. I don't know when Ford got into that, but I think he had always kind of been in. Even when he got into it, it was more like, I think, jumping probably straight to video. Whereas with me, where I got into it was back in about 2005, where I was working for a newspaper, was going to be taking on more of a role there, covering sports, shooting sports. And so I needed something that would be able to stop action well, and so that was how I kind of got into it.
And I think you got the 7D to start out. It's like a full frame.
Yeah, I think that was my first camera, and then really, like more important, really, at the time I got the Canon. Let's see, what is it? Now I'm going to blank out on the size of it, but it's the 24 to 70, I think it is. Or no. Maybe I can't remember. No, I'm sorry. 70 to 200 lens, 2.8, which is the big white lens that you see like at lots of press conferences and stuff. Like now it's, starting to change a little bit. People are using different things, but for the longest time,
that was the
standard. Right. Yeah. So that was great. It worked great for, stopping, shooting football players 40 yards away at night under poor stadium lights. So that was how I got into it.
Okay, I see. And where can we? Is there anywhere we can go to see some of those pictures you took? I'm curious, man.
Yeah, if you go.
What newspaper was it?
Well, the newspapers are all. Let's see if my might have to see. I think I have to change some of my privacy settings. Let me see real quick if I can. Sure, it will be some.
And this is, you were shooting with the 7D with the 70 to 200, right? Or no?
Yes. Okay. That was mostly what I was. Shooting, especially for sports. I had smaller lenses that I would use for other stuff, but that was mostly what I would use for sports, except for maybe basketball, like if you're underneath the goal and it's tighter there. But anywhere else, that's kind of what you needed.
Well, while you're looking for that, a couple of questions. When you're shooting, I'm curious because it's always been difficult for me to shoot sports stuff. Of course, I didn't have a 70 EF 70-200, but would you go all the, because it's like a 2.8, right?
Yes.
That's about. And would you go all the way down to 2.8 and catch that real, like, or would you just kind of keep it sort of sports mode and keep the shutter speed real fast and keep the lens real small? Or
No, I would go all the way down to
Yeah.
2.8 and usually crank up the ISO too if it was like shooting football at night or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't care for blur in sports photos. I mean,
Well, I don't
sometimes
think anybody does you?
well, no, but I mean, there are, you know, artistic ways you can use blur for certain kinds of photos, but typically not sports photos or something like that. So yeah, and so, you know, like with high school sports, I mean, you know, it's not like they're playing under college lights or pro lights or something like that. It's usually a lot of times like somewhat dimly lit fields. Now, it's depending on how old the school is and stuff like that. But you would really have to just about max out your settings to get, you know, shots without blur in them.
I have some photography friends that would shoot, and so when you're shooting, it looks. Shout out to Eddie. He would do this. I'll bring him up later, but he would shoot so that when you see the pictures on the screen, you know, right away when you see the playback, it's really dark. But then he would shoot in RAW, of course, and he'd go out and sort of editing. He'd bring it back with exposure and what have you. Since it's shot in RAW, there's a little bit of wiggle room. Would you do any kind of tricks like that, or would you just?
Yeah, I mean, I would normally shoot that way, and then of course go into Photoshop and, you know, edit them in there, of course, before they were printed too. Because, I mean, even if it shot perfectly straight out of the camera, which it wouldn't, or it wasn't, you know, usually going to, you would have to adjust it somewhat. But even if it had, you know, I mean, newspapers would print about 20% darker. Anyway, so
interesting. 20% darker.
Yeah, that's usually about the rough equivalent.
Got a little I've got so Jeremy Clark, he works with cameras and knows a lot about cameras. He's saying he gave me a link. So he's talking about so the difference between the well, let's get into that. Well, did you have a place that we could
I'm just finally like I finally had to like reset my password. I'll have a photo portfolio for you in a second, but I'm
curious. Well, but so you and I wanted to talk about the EOS R5, I guess it's on screen. R5 versus the Sony A7S III. Why can't they just call them like Ed and Bob? Why did they be so technical?
Yeah.
And you and I have been really curious about that, as both of us. So you're using sort of the run of the mill 80D, right?
Yeah, I bought this back in 2000. Trying to think when I got it. I think 2016, because I was in.
Wow,
I had gone back to school, and I was in getting a second degree, a film and digital media degree, and so the 7D was just not ideal for video at that point, really, with what I was doing, and so this seemed like a good sort of a good all around, you know, camera. It wasn't, even at the time, it wasn't the best at anything, at image quality or whatever, but it had certain things that weren't really that widespread at the time, like a fully articulating screen, where if you were shooting yourself, just if you were a one-man setup for, you know, preparing for an interview, or you were vlogging or whatever, that fully articulating screen is really handy, because, you know, it can go all the way around, and you can actually go sit down and see, you know, what you look like or whatever. Sony, you know, just finally did that with the A7S III.
Yeah.
They had been kind of slow, whereas Canon had started putting it on more of their models.
Yeah. I'm close to you. I've got the 77D, which is sort of it's not fully as it doesn't have the full specs that the 80D does, but it's really nice. I really appreciate it. I think I wanted to go to it because of the dual pixel. I really appreciate the dual pixel because I had upgraded. I got into cameras because of Ford and his vlogging, and I wanted to sort of do what he was doing, and he had the 60D. I went out and got the 60D.
Okay.
And then I just found that was mainly so the difference. This is something we could talk about. The difference between cameras that are for still pictures, which you got into it originally, and
Right.
and video, because the 60D was really good for professional type pictures, still pictures, photography. But video, I just found it to be a little too overkill, and it didn't have autofocus. So then I transferred over to the what is it? Is it the TI6i? No, the T6i, which had some autofocus, but it was really really jumpy.
Yeah.
But I appreciated that. It's a good camera. It came with, I mean, just the regular lenses that came with the stock lenses were decent enough. And then finally, a couple of years ago, I went to the 77D, and it just had the buttery smooth autofocus. I think it started with the 7D, with that buttery smooth autofocus of the dual pixel technology. I really appreciated, especially for video, because it would just naturally follow my face. And of course, the Sony came out with the what is it? What do they call it? The eye focus, or it follows people's eyes.
Yeah. I don't remember what it's called, but
yeah, and that's just as good, I think. But as we get into, so we are ready to go to the next level, and I don't know if I'm ready to go to this level. I think you are. But right, you were talking about maybe going.
Well, maybe. I mean, I would like to, but
it's expensive, right?
Yeah, I mean, they tend to be in the range of, I think. Let's see. Well, the R6 is about 2,500. I think the new Sony is 3,000 ish.
Okay.
So, yeah, I may not take that jump right now. I would like to, but I don't know if I can really justify it. Part of it probably depends on my next job and what I'm doing and things like that.
Right. COVID isn't really the best time unless we get another sweet check from the government.
Right.
Probably not a great time.
Probably. Yeah. Not even then for me. It can go to other things, but yeah.
Well, to get into what I've seen from the difference to the EOS 5 and the Sony A7S III, man, that's a mouthful. I've seen a lot of comparisons. The biggest thing, of course, is the EOS R5. It can do a lot more as far as I think it gets up to 8K, but it overheats. And so Jeremy posted what his comment was an article on that being a big myth, but I have seen some pretty in-depth comparisons, and it does overheat at about 35 minutes. It does overheat. I've just seen it live. Whereas the Sony continues to, and we're talking about while recording video, the Sony 7S III is just, so far all the reviews have said it's just as good as some of the, so like the what is it, the Black Magic, or any of these that typically are used for professional video. The A7S really does just as well. Of course, it's just as expensive as some of those. The Pocket Blackmagic. What have you seen as far as the comparison between the two?
Sorry, I'm sitting here trying to. I had too many failed password attempts on my SmugMug account, so then now it's locked me out, and I'm having to contact customer support, which is
no,
so.
Sorry.
What? I'm sorry. What was your question again?
So what is as you've started to research the EOS R5 and the Sony A7S III, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, the overheating is a real issue for the R5 and the R6. I don't really know why they built them that way. I mean, they said they wanted to keep them smaller, and make sure they could be weatherproofed and stuff like that. But you have to then really have to know like what kind of user you are. It's not something that you could just sit there and use if you wanted to film a short film or an independent film or something to that effect, because it's eventually just going to shut down using it in most of those modes. It would be tough to use it for. I'm getting static on my thing. I don't know if that's mine or yours. So event photography or event video, anything like that, that's going to make it tough. The R5 is a great still camera. And you could certainly use it for, certain things with video, but, I just don't know exactly what the, who exactly it's designed for in terms of video, if you use it for video.
Well, and that's the thing is I think that I believe that there's been some kind of impetus in the company to keep it oriented towards photography.
Yeah.
And not give in to to me would be smart play would be to go. There's just such a deluge of people that are using video nowadays, especially now that everybody's home. More and more people are at home because of COVID and stuff like that. It would seem to me that, of course, they didn't know when they're working on this that there would be such a big change. But they have focused more, and this is an excellent camera. The EOS 5 is way better than the Sony A7S III. We need nicknames for them. For still photography, from the comparison and preview and reviews that I've seen, the Canon is still superior when it comes to still photography. And just in general, the kind of editing, going from raw, even the raw video to raw, to editing it up and doing color grading, it seems to be just as good or superior, even in video, to the Sony. It's just that the Sony is out of the box, just right there. Filming is just much better and doesn't shut down. Now, I have seen some little hacks for the EOS R5. So for the Sony R5, for the Canon R5, as far as opening up the viewfinder, just something as simple as that can really help. Putting something cool where the viewfinder goes instead. They have some little things you can buy, hacks you can buy. There's been lens adapters that you can use that have been developed. So there are things that you would think that Canon would have included in their original build.
Right.
But maybe they just care more about being the photographer's camera rather than the videographer's camera.
Yeah, maybe. And you get into all this I can focus more now. I'm just giving up on all that other stuff. I had to email tech support. So, you get into all these different kinds of things with companies not wanting to compete with themselves with other cameras that they've launched, and so Canon has some larger, more like, cinema type cameras.
Yeah.
I think if they really wanted to, they could have probably very easily made the R5 into something that was probably better than their cinema camera in terms of, if they had made it a little bit bigger, they wouldn't have had to worry about overheating. But I think that's a lot of it, is that, not only are they're trying to compete with other brands to put out a better product.
Yeah.
But then they're trying to avoid beating themselves by giving you something that, makes much more sense for you to buy over one of their more expensive options. So, I think a lot of that's just intentionally done that way to preserve profits.
Well, preserve profits and maybe preserve like a sense, have like a consistent. It seems like they've always been. They don't want to be just a run of the mill, poor man's camera. They want to be the rich man's camera, right? Whereas Sony, they don't care. It's like guerrilla warfare for them. They just want to be the camera. It feels to me like there's a little bit of an elitist approach from Canon, where they want to have the highest, and whether it's quality or not doesn't really matter. They want it to be expensive, right? Where people say, "Oh, that is the expensive. I want the expensive one, the Apple of cameras."
Yeah, they're probably so. Yeah.
Well, and so I think I think Jeremy left. He said, I accidentally put Jaren in the title. So he says Sony is sharper, but a pain with worse menus, and Canon is softer, but more natural with better menus. Well, I mean, better menus or not is based on what you're used to, I'm sure.
Partially, but yeah, I think companies can just be more user friendly about some of the things like that.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting. Ford and I we did an interview with one of his friends, and he was he had something. He was like a developer or something. He said he brought up the idea that there is no such thing as user error. That users are penultimate in the, there's no such thing as, well, it works better if the user, even if the user doesn't. Well, no, it's made for people. If people don't know how to use it, then there's computer error.
Yeah. I think part of too, though, what you get into there is with, I guess, maybe the term prosumer models, where they're kind of building it for, or building and marketing stuff for like low level professionals or high level consumers. And so some things are just like, and people don't read instructions and stuff like that. Like I remember I was shooting a basketball game one time, and I was in a very affluent area where parents could, afford to buy just whatever they wanted to shoot their kids' photos or whatever. Nice. No idea how to use it, No. And so, and so I was talking to her, and it was probably kind of dumb on my part. I was just assuming that she knew like basic stuff about it, and she did not. And so I said, well, like, it looks like you're shooting in sports mode. I said, I normally shoot in manual. And so I was trying to explain the differences between like what you can do in manual, or how you can, customize your settings in manual versus sports mode. And I go through all of this. And then after talking for a couple minutes, she's like, she's looking at my dial and the little graphics on the dial and on her dial, and she goes, sports mode. Is that the little running man?
Oh man.
Is that the little running man? I'm like, yeah, that's the little running man. And so I realized I had just completely wasted, 2 minutes of both of our lives in giving this explanation when, so yeah. So, but I think that's just kind of part of what you run into in today's world where, there is the prosumer line of products where, it's built for professionals to a certain extent, but then consumers can get it. And so you've got that overlap. And I'm glad I'm not the one who has to, try to figure out where the line falls in terms of making it something that's not going to be so elementary and basic that professionals are going to be like, what in the world? Why can't I, but at the same time, not making it so that high level, wealthy consumers, just it's too complex for them to work with.
Well, and historically, that is sort of what has killed Sony is they get too wonky in their approach, and they don't know that limit. And it may be, to Canon's credit, the reason Canon is the number one camera out there is because they have been slow and incremental in their development. And I think having abundance of caution, have just continued to sort of look at, and not just make wild changes like Sony. They just jump in, right? They jumped in with what are those little discs that they used to have? Did you ever get those little disc player? The mini disc player.
Oh no, I never
jumped into, they just jump into technology and just they think, well, this is really, people are going to really like this, but you get a little whiplash. I think they have really landed on something good with these mirrorless cameras, though. And that's when you're trying to hit a home run, when you finally do, you strike out a lot, but when you finally do, ride that to the win. And they're doing a good job of continuing to upgrade and provide a great product with Sony. That's why, and it's okay. So let's get in. The reason I want to move over to Sony is because I just feel like they are much more oriented towards video, whereas Canon continues to be. I mean, takes a great picture.
Mm-hmm.
I hear about this more natural and what have you, and it's true that Sony tends to be a little bit more. It needs a little bit more. Sometimes a lot more editing and color grading afterwards, in the sense that it tends to be sort of modeling colors. Of course, the dynamic range is greater, whereas sometimes Canon will, pick the colors for you.
Mm-hmm.
You have a little bit more options in editing for the Sony. What you have talked about maybe jumping ship from Canon. What are some of your reasons?
Yeah, I think Canon, like you said, I think part of it is that they've been more focused on photography, at least in terms of their, sort of prosumer, smaller line of cameras. They've got their cinema cameras too, and so, again, I'm not sure how much is them like not wanting to compete with themselves or whatever, but it seems like almost a combination of like with the hybrid models of still cameras and videos, they don't want to compete with themselves. They are a little more focused on video. And then to a certain extent, it seems like they've just enjoyed being like the top dog for a long time. It was them and Nikon for the longest time. And I don't know how their sales are doing right now, but it seems like they've just sort of, had this attitude of like, we're still the top guy, as these other companies have passed them. And for a lot of the reasons you just mentioned, I had been waiting and hoping that Canon would come out with a good 4K video camera, similar to kind of what Sony has been moving along with on different models, or Panasonic or whatever. I remember a few years back they came out with, I think it was the Mark IV. That was their first. Well, I don't know if it's the first one, but it was a 4K, like prosumer, still photo and video camera hybrid. But the crop factor on it was like 1.3, 1.4, something like that.
What was it? Were you talking about Sony or Canon?
Canon.
Oh yeah, their first was it that was their first mirrorless, right? It was like a.
I don't remember if it was mirrorless or not, but I think it was the Mark IV. We can probably look it up. But so when that came along, I'm like, oh, and before I knew about the crop factor on it, I was like, oh, that's it was the 5D. Yeah, see, I think the 5D Mark IV.
5D. Oh, so no, it wasn't mirrorless, but it was full frame.
Not on 4K. It was full frame on HD, and then we'd have to.
So there, yeah, and wasn't it? I think I remember reading it, and it you couldn't do any kind of. I think you had to stick with like at max 30 frames per second if you're doing video, right?
I think so. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. It looks like the crop factor. Let's see if I can find this here. I found a, oh, wow. Yeah. So, they had a firmware update. The first one I found is a firmware update that, reduces the crop factor from down to 1.27 from 1.74. So the original crop factor was 1.74. I had forgotten that it was that high. That's crazy. So yeah. So once I saw that, I'm like, okay, well, forget it.
Yeah.
And then, all of a sudden, like here in 2020 with everything else going on, all of a sudden they released, they announced that the R5 and the R6 were coming along, and so there again, I'm like, okay, maybe this is it. This one, they're going to finally get it right on. And I think they did, except for the overheating, which kind of
now, and that's important to you, right? Because you are transitioning. You're not, you don't take pictures anymore like you used to, and not for a living. And you're transitioning more into video type work, right? You have a degree in
film and digital media.
Yeah. Film and digital media. Awesome.
Yep.
And so as you're working with that, and you're doing a lot more editing and stuff for your job and for money, and do you find that do you ever go out and rent a camera, or?
I haven't needed it up until, up to this point. And that's why I haven't really been able to justify, getting into a 4K model or something like that. But depending on what I do next, because my job was a casualty of COVID. So I've been laid off for about 6 weeks. There's a chance. It's technically a temporary layoff. There's a chance I could go back. I think that's highly unlikely. So I'm not sure what I'll be doing next. I've done some freelance, really video editing, where people were uploading the clips and I just put it together.
Okay. So you didn't have to do any filming for that.
So I didn't have to do any filming even for that. So I haven't had a real need for that. And if I went into another job, most likely they would probably have their own equipment. So I don't know that I would necessarily buy. I mean, really where you would need it is if you're doing your own sort of business type of thing. But regardless, I think even if you're in a job and you're recommending equipment for a company to buy or something like that, then you need to be aware of these cameras, to make the best judgment call for your company and for yourself, to not make life difficult for yourself. And so, the way I've seen a couple of reviewers put it that I think would resonate with anybody who's done any kind of video shoot, photo shoot, or whatever, is that there are so many variables and so many factors that you have to worry about in almost any video setup.
Yeah.
You do not want to compound it by having to worry about whether or not your equipment is going to shut off due to overheating.
Well, and I'll tell you, these articles about that it's a myth and it doesn't really overheat, that doesn't help, because that makes me feel like I'm gonna get it, and I'm gonna put confidence in it, and right when I need it most, it's gonna overheat on me. I don't. When people start saying, well, there's ways to fix it, there's hacks and all that, that doesn't make me, I don't want to.
No.
What is the phrase about buckets and holes? It's just a wet mess. But I don't want to fill the hole by putting it in a bucket or whatever,
yeah. And I don't know if you mean that literally or not, but that is what like people are suggesting. Like Canon's own official documentation listed like carrying like an external like box fan or something like that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I can't believe they actually put that out. And then other people are like, oh, well, maybe you could have like a cooler with ice, but you'd have to put it in a bag so that there wasn't condensation. And what I'm thinking in my mind is like, just bleep you, like, I can't believe we're having this conversation. Shut up.
Yeah. I just think it's a pretty easy choice if you're somebody that wants to film more than, and of course, well, you have to make the decision if you're going to be doing live streaming. There's no way you'd want to use the Canon. You might want to use the Sony. It's interesting. I'm starting to segue, as I think I told you about using the I don't know if I have using the adapter to stream DSLR like this. I use the Logitech Brio, but I'm starting to look at maybe streaming DSLR since it gives it that more cinematic look. But I think that people that are filming short films and stuff like that, I can't imagine shooting a short film, and I don't have as much experience. I saw your short film, and you've done it much more. I can't imagine shooting for less than 35 minutes, right?
Well, you're typically not going to be shooting. When you say that, do you mean total or like at one clip at a time?
On location, when like a scene.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the amount of time you'll have the camera running at one time, you're never going to go for 35 minutes. It's not going to be some kind of Birdman type shot or something like that, most likely. But
I guess that's true.
But in terms of the duration that you're there, it's definitely going to be long, lengthy hours, even for a short amount of runtime. So
but that's an important point, though. I wonder if it still overheats if it has tons of little breaks. If you're just shooting 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, 15 minutes at a time. Because you're right, it's not streaming, and interviews. I think you don't want to use it if you do interviews. You definitely don't. And I've used my DSLR for interviews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's still continually building heat. Is the problem. I think the only ways it's not really building heat is if you're shooting still photos, or there are a couple of like HD modes where it's not. But basically, like the R5, R6, if you're in any of those modes, even if it's just sitting idle in between shots, it's still building heat. So it's not going to build it as fast, obviously, but it's still. Right. By the way, they did finally unlock my account, so you can go to jaredputnam.smugmug.com.
What an adventure!
Yeah, that was so aggravating. I mean, like, it's my photos. What, you know, do we really need to have like bank security level of protection on my photo portfolio?
That's funny. Hey, Jared Putnam, PUTAM?
NAM.
NAM? Yeah. So have you had, recently you did a great video on colognes. And it looks like you used a DSLR for that.
I did. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Did you use your ADD for that?
I used it for that. Yeah. I just set it up on the tripod, and that's where the articulating screen comes in handy. And something like that, you know, I mean, it's not like I need 4K for that.
Right.
Really, just getting a lighting setup would probably be the thing that would benefit me most. And that's probably what I really need to invest in next is an actual lighting setup, as opposed to, you know, just getting a higher resolution 4K camera or something.
Interesting. Yeah, of course, that is the difficulty for me, is I mostly do streaming anymore. The DSLR isn't as important to me as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you can have something. So we're streaming on StreamYard right now. StreamYard in its pro version, you can stream 1080p. This is 70. This is 720, but they tweaked it so that it's so that it gets much more higher definition streams. And I mean, to me, it looks pretty good using the Logitech Brio, which is actually a pretty good camera.
Yeah, yours looks really good. I think I need a webcam upgrade or something.
What do you have?
It's a Logitech 2, but I don't remember the model of it. But it's supposed to be like 1080p. I'm not sure, you know, what really the difference is, but
maybe make sure that you're on 720 with the go down to the cam mic settings, advanced. All right, and while I'm gonna look for, I got your all right, let me share this real quick. So I want to hear a little bit about, these are really good. These are really good.
Thanks.
And you did this with a 7D, right?
Yeah, let's see. All of these, I'm trying to think like how far back some of these go. All of these would have been done with either a 7D or a did I have a 7D? I guess most all of these were 7D. Some of them might have been no, I think basically all of them were 7D. Yep.
And so this was for a local newspaper?
For a couple of different ones. I mean, they were, you know, like daily papers, but, you know, not like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But yeah, most of those were a lot of those were from when I worked at the Gainesville Times, when I was sports editor at the Gainesville Times in Gainesville, Georgia. So that was where you'll see a few of like Deshaun Watson.
My next question is, what is this picture with Deshaun Watson? You got to tell me about that.
Yeah, so I actually didn't. That's maybe the one photo in there that I didn't take myself. I was there though. We had it was for when he was a senior, the high school preview.
Yeah.
We did a superhero theme, and so that was actually him kneeling down on a gymnasium floor, and our main photographer, got up on the stands above him to shoot down at him. I was standing behind him, flapping his cape, and then I edited it into that shot, and I think it was actually like yeah. So that's one. I think probably the only one.
This is him. Wait, is this him right here?
No, that's UGA and Clemson. We were there. I was there at that game because that was his first game. It was Clemson versus UGA. So I think that was the one I was there for. Yeah. And so So we were there for that, but that shot wasn't him. No.
So I didn't realize he went to Gainesville High or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gainesville High School in
Man.
Georgia.
So for those of you who don't know, he is a elite level, I would say elite level NFL quarterback right now that plays for the Houston Texans. He's
Yeah. He went to Clemson, won a national championship at Clemson, and then he's one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL.
And let's see, do you have any other stars that you're able to take?
We can scroll down through there. I think there's some of the Braves. There's like Matt Ryan. Some of the Falcons.
Matt Ryan.
It was. Scroll back up. It's,
you got one. Here's Julio.
Yeah, Julio. These were from like sort of community outreach things that the Falcons did in the area.
But you said you have, all right. So where is the? Oh, is this the Matt Ryan right here?
There's a couple. I can't. You're kind of going too fast. There's one of them at practice, and then there's another one from community outreach stuff. Okay.
These are sick, man.
Thanks.
I love this action shot right here.
Yeah, that was action shots are just if you can get a good action shot, it's so much fun. There's Brian McCann, former Brave. When they would the Braves did a thing for a couple of years, and maybe they still do it when we're not having COVID, but it was called the Braves Caravan, and they would go around and basically sign articles. They had some kind of promotional deal with I think it was Academy Sports. It got renamed a couple of times, but it was a sporting goods store, and they would go to those and do autograph signings and stuff.
Okay.
Oh yeah. There's Matt Ryan doing and giving a high five to a kid with his jersey too.
Matty Ice.
Yeah, that one was all the way back. That one's been a while now. That's maybe 2013, 2014.
Okay, I'm cutting off his face. All right. Well, I just wanted to take a look. I didn't realize you were. So did you ever think about going stepping it up a level and doing photography for bigger papers?
No, because like I started to see so like I got into newspapers in 2004, let's see, I'm trying to think when that would have been 2004, 2005. And at some point I kind of started to see where the industry was heading. What was interesting was, I started out at a little community newspaper. And so I did everything, in terms of like shooting photos and writing and doing the layout and stuff like that. And I enjoyed all of it. And I thought, man, if I keep going up, I'm going to have to specialize more the further I go up, because that was, what had been true of the industry forever, or at least, for a long time at the higher levels. And then once the newspaper industry kind of started to collapse, then they really started, a lot of papers just completely started laying off their photography staff, and had their reporters shooting photos. And so I kind of chuckled, because then like once the industry started to crumble, like someone like me became the model where, if you could do both, then that was really valuable. So to a certain extent, there would have probably been some incentive for me to stay in, for that. But, you're just looking at all the jobs getting slashed, and, regardless of what you could do, I was just very aware of the fact that, newspapers are shrinking down to 10% or less of what they've been at one point. And I didn't want to stay in something that I had seen sort of the peak of it.
Yeah.
And then just to sit there and watch it crumble, like, that wasn't for me. And, all the other stuff that goes along with it, like the climate towards the media nowadays, everything is, if you're in the media, it's like you're treated as the mainstream media, and you're treated as fake news if people don't like what you're saying. So there were a lot of reasons for me to get out, but it was ironic to me to see that, like sort of what I was able to do and what I enjoyed doing, being able to do both photos and writing sort of became the ideal model for the higher level, of papers, because they just couldn't afford to staff, that
Both.
many people. Yeah.
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 Well, last question, then we got to go. But when you're getting shots like this, I love this football one.
Yeah.
I mean, whoever's mom, I mean, if I'm that guy, I'm gonna like so appreciate this picture the rest of my life, right? But when you're taking photos like this, do you just spray? You just spraying, like taking or because that's typically what when I'm trying to get action shots, just pick. I'm postponing the work to later when I'm editing, just going through each millions of photos to find the right one, or are you saving yourself time just taking spurts like 5 or
yeah, that is kind of what it's like. As a play starts to develop, I'm waiting for what I think is going to be the best moment to get a burst of shots. But I won't be, just like on a single play, I won't be holding it down. Now, like total, I may go away from a game with hundreds of shots, but for any one play, I'm not just, like holding it down from start to finish. Like I'm waiting for what I think is going to be like the peak moment of the action for where I'm positioned and the play and everything else. And so then within that, I'll hold it down and maybe get, 8 shots at one time from that. And then, pick out, and then hopefully it's in focus and hopefully it's a good action play, and then pick out, my favorite frame from within that. And it's amazing, how fast they move and how much changes from one split second to another and how much of a difference it makes.
Well, also, so people may not know this, but me and you and AJ Herschel, the kid, have a fantasy football podcast, and you have a great deal of knowledge about sports, more than just football, right? You've sort of grown up liking baseball and football and basketball.
Yeah, I mean, I was never a good player at any of them, but I was always interested in them, and so and then just from my job, I mean, we covered everything, everything in terms of just every sport under the sun.
That's what I was going to ask. Did it probably your knowledge of the sport helped a lot? Because I mean, if you know football, when things are going to start getting, you sort of know the rhythms of when people are going down, if he's going to attempt to bull through people or jump into the end zone or something like that,
Right. It did help tremendously. And I would see, and that was actually one thing that I would notice is I would usually be set up at a different part of the field than a lot of photographers who didn't. And I don't think it was even that much of knowing necessarily the sport as not just the sport, but like understanding the situation of like it's 3rd and 10 or 3rd and 15 or whatever. And also understanding the team, like these were a lot of teams that we covered consistently. You knew what they liked to do, what they were good at doing. And so really a combination of all that, of knowing the sport, of knowing the situation and what was likely to happen, of knowing the team and how it liked to run its offense. It's not that, I mean, cameras are so good nowadays. Almost anyone can go out there, with a little bit of, teaching or whatever and get, some pretty good shots. I think part of what, has to separate you, if you're going to separate yourself a little bit, is knowing how to put yourself in, position to be more likely to get a successful, shot.
Well, give me an example. Where were you for this shot, and where was everybody else? No, I mean, like, not in reality, but like,
Yeah.
What was sort of the trend? You would go down to the line where everybody else would stay for away, or what?
So yeah, I mean, for this shot, I definitely can't, pull the specifics out of my brain. But so this team was Pinecrest Academy. The guy carrying the ball is for Pinecrest Academy. It's a little bitty single A, which is the smallest level of school in Georgia, Catholic school, and they typically, I think maybe at different times they would have a decent. Well, actually, no, I don't think they really had a passing game until after I was already gone. So basically, all they did was run the ball.
Okay.
And so some of these teams did that. It was just triple option.
It's mostly high school, right?
It's mostly high school, and
that's what they mostly do in high school, just run the ball, right?
Well, depending on where it is,
Okay.
and so so they had to use a lot of misdirection and stuff like that. And teams like this were hard because a lot of it to get good shots of, because a lot of it was, runs up the middle, and it's just a guy getting the ball and running into a pile of bodies, and then you can't get a shot. Or they do the misdirection so well that you're trying to figure out, like, okay, who's actually got the ball, and then you miss, you get it wrong, because sometimes you look at how defenses get fooled. Even sometimes the camera on TV, will get fooled in terms of who has the ball, like on a QB keeper if he fakes it well. So so with this team, I wasn't usually ever set up too far down the field, because it wasn't like they were going to throw a 35-yard pass that I needed to be there to get. And so I would get maybe 5 to 10 yards down the, off the line of scrimmage. Yeah. And then teams like this, usually even beyond that, had a side of the field that they like to run to, because they might have like 2 really good offensive linemen, and they've got them both on the left side.
Gotcha.
And so that they're almost always going to be running that way, even if the defense is coming, because it just makes so much more sense for them to play to their strengths. And so that would be some of the things. Now, this type of shot, these games were always fun because it was a day game. And so you could get much better stuff. Whereas with night games, it depended on the quality of the lights on the field, and even if they were low quality lights, from one spot to another, one spot might be way too dark.
Really?
And then like 2 feet over might be blown out. And so, there's Todd Gurley.
Todd Gurley. Is this a day game?
Yeah, this was that UGA Clemson game. Yeah, I don't know if that was. I think that was Deshaun's first game. I think that was the reason for Clemson. The reason that I was there, but I don't know that it was. I think it was an afternoon game, so it was like probably like a 4 o'clock game. But
basketball must have been the hardest.
Basketball
for light.
Basketball, yeah, and you wouldn't, like, within a gym, you've got a lot of lights, but they're not strong, and they're way up in the ceiling, and
they're green.
It is. It's like a weird tint to it. And so
that's a good shot, though. Wow.
Some of the ones that I enjoyed the most were like, if you scroll back, if you go back out to like the full page, I can, whatever time we have left, I can point out 1 or 2 little ones that I kind of enjoyed. Okay. Let's see if it's hang on, go back to the top. Just let me look for a second here. Let's see. Oh, go to the left one, the second one down from the left. It's a lacrosse shot. This one. So I won first place in a annual state competition for this one. Mainly I think just because of the way that kid is doing the split there, so I think I have him to thank for that, because I mean,
I like this next one.
Yeah.
This is good.
Yeah, I didn't get anything for that. I thought that one was kind of funny. The goalkeeper's trying to, knock the ball away, and then the kid's trying to like head it back into the goal. And then I think the one below that may be another one of, that one's Deshaun again when he was at Gainesville. So
I noticed some of these are more grainy than others. How much? So obviously the indoor ones, you got to do a little bit more. You got more ISO and a little more editing.
Yeah.
Here's the night game right here. Yeah, you can see the
grain in that one. And I didn't really, because they were going into print paper anyway, where you were going to lose quality and where you were going to have the ink dots that almost look like a certain kind of graininess itself.
Yeah.
I never really, I of course tried to keep it from being grainy, but if I had to sacrifice one way or another, blur versus, grain, then I would sacrifice to the side of grain. And this field is a good example of what I was talking about in terms of, like, this field was really bad in terms of one spot could just be ultra dark, and then one spot could be well
lit,
blown, well lit, or like almost blown out when you. But
interesting. This is a great shot. Like, that's not
Deshaun. That
number 6.
Deshaun was what was Deshaun's number now? I can't remember off the top of my head, but 4. He was 4. This was one of their receivers, and so he had caught a pass, and so he was diving for the pylon on that one.
It's beautiful.
So and then that one's Bobby Cox, the old Braves manager, Bobby Cox, playing golf.
Interesting.
They had a like a celebrity kind of golf tournament where people could go pay bukus of money to golf with Bobby Cox and a bunch of the old Braves players at the time.
Nice, Big. This is great.
So it's fun for me to go back and look through those and think about what was going on at the time. Some of the reaction shots. I think the next one down is
well, look at how crisp and clear his eye is. How all this motion, and you have a pretty deep depth of field here. Field of depth here. What is it?
Depth of field.
Depth of field here. How did you get such a crispy, clear focus on his eye? I mean, Canon, not a
right.
Canon's. So I'm sorry, I interrupt you. How do you do it?
Well, I mean, there's not really there's not really a trick to it in terms of what doing something different from what you're normally doing. It's just you just hope that you've got it, that you move kind of with his movement and keep it on him, and you hope that the light is good. And I mean, so you're talking about getting a handful of shots, good shots out of hundreds, and so your return on investment is if you get 5%, that's really good. I mean, of something that you're going to use for a newspaper.
Yeah,
because usually we would Photoshop maybe half a dozen shots to give the page layout people some options, and you had your preferences and stuff like that. But that's typically what you were going for, was maybe half a dozen. And like those shots, like the one below, are fun because that was
right here?
Like that was a walk-off win for the Gainesville baseball team and stuff like that. Some reaction shots, can be a lot of times more fun than some of the action shots.
I just know that if I'm one of these, I treasure some. I played high school basketball, and I treasure some of the pictures. It's just a grainy local newspaper. Yeah. But if I could go back and find those photographers, I'd like to get some of these.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa, this is cool. What in the world?
That is that was a football game, North Forsyth High School football game, and they're playing the Wolverines, and so they put like a werewolf, and they've got the werewolf hanging off a stick, and then that was around the time that the LeBron throw the chalk up thing got popular. and someone threw up way too much. You can see if you look above the end of the stick there, you can see it pouring off of someone's hand there. Yeah, you got the cursor on there. And so that was the time when it got really popular. So here it's just a wild, it's like borderline Mad Max, something out of Mad Max if you just took away the band instruments or something, because you got all these guys in body paint dangling this effigy of a wolf, and then all this like dust chalk just flying around everywhere.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we're out of time. These are great pictures. It makes me wonder, do you ever miss taking stills, or can you translate a lot of that skill to video?
Oh, absolutely. It's the same. It's a lot of the same principles in terms of shot composition, so all those skills just, have helped me tremendously. And I've still shot some, still shots in, the work that I had been doing as a communication specialist, just not, just not nearly as much, but, it just ports over seamlessly. You basically have to take all that, same knowledge and then just add in other elements of motion and different things like that.
Well, if anybody's looking for a good photographer or videographer, this is your guy. And editor and writer. Like, you get the full package. Hire this man. If you're still watching, then you might want to.
I did the editing I did was for I've got a buddy who is executive director of the Historic Preservation Network for the state of Michigan, and so the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions has their had their awards ceremony, and so that was the freelance work I did. It was just but it really wasn't even video clips there. Mostly, it was mostly like still shots, still photo shots that they provided, and then I did a voiceover narration, and I did movement, within the photos. When
you did the voiceover, I'm curious, did you put any accent or inflection on it, like to make it a little more interesting?
No, it was just probably my professional voice.
Okay.
I could have done it in the. Imagine if I had done it in the Ford voice for them. I'm like, what in the world have we gotten into? But so I did those, and so he said they were happy with those, and said that the lady that was over it all would always talk about like Jared's videos, and I said, yeah, I want this to just develop into like this legend that just keeps growing within that, like nothing. There's never any real tangible benefit to me. It's just like within that little network, the legend of Jared's videos just keeps growing. I'll settle for that.
I love it. Well, on that, the legend of Jared. It's Jared. You can find us on the Roto Hackers podcast. If you have any interest in fantasy football, that should be coming up pretty soon on the Roto Hackers page or channel. But until then, until our next Not a Show, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Jeremy for the only one who left a comment. And for everybody else who tuned in, my name is Judah, and I was lucky to talk to Jared about photography, video, and cameras today.
Thanks for having me.